I'll be sitting in the evening car.
He recorded it 3 days before he died. He thought the song was unfinished. He planned to go back into the studio and fix it. He never got the chance. And what he left behind, with a whistled ending he improvised because he forgot the words, became the first posthumous #1 in American chart history.
I just walked in to find you here with that sad look upon your face.
That is what this music does. It outlives everything. Welcome to RnBPulseTrack, where we go beneath the record, behind the studio glass, and into the true stories that made these songs immortal.
I see the crystal raindrops fall and the beauty of...
Tonight, we count down the 12 most played, most remembered, and most deeply felt recordings in the entire history of R&B and soul. Songs that the world has simply never stopped listening to. Number 12. Our first story begins with a man who walked away from one of the biggest groups in R&B over a contract dispute and wrote his greatest song in a rented apartment because a label wouldn't pay him what he was owed. Stand By Me, Ben E. King, 1961, Atlantic/Atco Records.
should crumble to the sea.
Ben E. King had just left the Drifters when Atlantic connected him with Jerry Lieber and Mike Stoller, the men behind Hound Dog, Jailhouse Rock, and Yakety Yak. After finishing Spanish Harlem, they had studio time left. They turned to King and asked if he had anything else. He sat down and played a melody the Drifters' manager had already rejected. Mike Stoller heard 2 bars and moved to the piano.
You stand by me. So
What they built in that leftover session became the 4th most performed song of the entire 20th century. Over 7 million broadcast performances confirmed by BMI. It has been covered more than 500 times.
won't cry, no, I won't shed a...
In 1986, director Rob Reiner heard it at home, stopped the record mid-play, and called his producer to say he had found the title for his new film. But if that was the sound of a voice finding its freedom. The next story shows what happens when a voice is caged for 6 years and finally gets out. Number 11, moving on to a song that became something far larger than a hit. It became the sound of an entire nation demanding to be heard. Respect, Aretha Franklin, 1967, Atlantic Records. Columbia Records had Aretha Franklin for 6 years. 6 years of polished arrangements that buried everything extraordinary about her. When her contract ended, Atlantic producer Jerry Wexler took her to Muscle Shoals, sat her down at a piano, and told her to be herself.
What you need to, you know I got it too.
She walked in on Valentine's Day 1967 with the entire arrangement already in her head, flipped the gender of every lyric, brought her sisters to sing backup, spelled out R-E-S-P-E-C-T letter by letter, and added "Sock It to Me" in the bridge. Neither edition was planned before she walked in. The result was a civil rights anthem, a feminist declaration, and a gospel shout all in one record. Aretha said it depicted the need of a nation. Otis Redding, who wrote the original, heard her version and said simply, "That girl has taken my song." Rolling Stone later ranked it the greatest song ever made. The next recording would raise the bar even higher, and it came from a man who recorded his masterpiece and never lived to hear it on the radio. Number 10, Few songs carry the weight of a life's final chapter. The next one does. Sittin' On the Dock of the Bay, Otis Redding. 1968, Stax/Volt Records.
Sitting on the dock of the bay.
Otis Redding wrote the first verse on a houseboat in Sausalito after his legendary Monterey Pop Festival set. In November 1967, he took it to Memphis and recorded it with Steve Cropper over 2 sessions.
2,000 miles I roamed.
It was unlike anything he had ever made. No fire, no shouting, just a man and something heavy on his chest he couldn't name. When it came time for the outro, he forgot the words he had planned. So he whistled. Engineer Ron Capone told him, "Otis, one thing for sure, you'll never be a whistler."
Here resting my bones in this long
3 days after that final session, his plane went down into Lake Monona, Wisconsin. He was 26. Steve Cropper returned to the studio alone, finished the mix, and added the ocean sounds Redding had described from the houseboat. Released in January 1968, it became the first posthumous #1 in American chart history.
sitting on the
Otis thought it was unfinished. The world disagreed. The next entry belongs to 2 men who had never met, and together, almost by accident, created one of the most enduring love songs ever recorded. Number 9. The next recording is the story of 2 legends who barely knew each other and made one of the smoothest, most beloved songs in soul history, largely in separate rooms. Just the 2 of Us. Grover Washington Jr. featuring Bill Withers, 1981. Elektra Records.
Just the 2 of us. We can
Grover Washington Jr. had spent the 1970s crossing jazz into the mainstream without losing his soul. His producer, Ralph McDonald, knew the new track needed one specific kind of voice and sent it to Bill Withers, who by 1980 was already walking away from the industry.
can make it if we try. Just the 2 of us.
Withers agreed on one condition. He said, "I'm a little snobbish about words. Let me go in and dress these lyrics up a little bit." What he did to those lyrics elevated the song from a good record to a timeless one.
I hear the crystal raindrops fall on the window.
Here is the detail most people never know. The day Withers arrived to record his vocal was the first time he had ever met Grover Washington Jr. in person. 2 men who created one of the most intimate recordings in soul history had never shared a room before that session.
Can make it if we try. Just the 2 of us.
Just the 2 of Us reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 and won the Grammy for Best R&B Song. It has since been sampled in over 90 hip-hop recordings and went viral on TikTok in 2020, introducing it to an entirely new generation.
Building castles in the sky. Just the 2.
But the next artist didn't just make intimate music. He went to war with his producer, fought for every second of his greatest record, and then performed it before 34 million people. Number 8. The next recording came from a place of real fear and a producer who almost cut the most important 29 seconds in pop history. Billie Jean, Michael Jackson. 1983. Michael Jackson wrote Billie Jean from real fear. A woman had been sending him disturbing letters for years, claiming a child was his. Then a package arrived containing a gun and a note telling him to shoot himself. He couldn't talk about it in public. He put it in music instead. When he brought the demo to Quincy Jones, Jones wanted to cut the 29-second bass intro. Too long before the vocal, he said. Jackson refused. That's the jelly. That's what makes me want to dance. Jones later admitted that when Michael Jackson says something makes him want to dance, you stop arguing. Engineer Bruce Swedian mixed the track 91 times. They ended up using mix number 2. MTV refused to play the video until CBS Records president Walter Yetnikoff threatened to pull every CBS artist from the channel. Billie Jean became the first video by a black artist to receive significant MTV airplay. At the Motown 25 special, Jackson performed it before 34 million viewers and introduced the moonwalk to the world. The song spent 7 weeks at number 1. If that was a man at war with the industry, the next recording is a family telling the truth in church clothes and daring the world not to move. Number 7. Meanwhile in Memphis, a family group with deep gospel roots was about to prove that sacred and secular had never needed to live in separate rooms. I'll Take You There. The Staple Singers. Or it's 1972?
Ain't nobody worried.
Al Bell of Stax saw something in the Staple Singers that other labels had missed. A father, Pop Staples, who played guitar like a man delivering a sermon, and a daughter named Mavis, whose voice could move you from church to the dance floor in a single bar. He built I'll Take You There around a bass line drawn from a Jamaican record by a group called the Heptones, handed it to Mavis, and let the session breathe. She improvised most of her vocal ad-libs in real time. The results sounded ancient and brand new simultaneously. It hit number 1 on both the pop and R&B charts in 1972 and has never truly left. It has played at political rallies, funerals, and weddings for 5 decades. Pop Staples said of that record, "We just told the truth and let the music do the rest."
No, ain't no smiling faces.
The next story is about a man who told a very different kind of truth and whose label buried it for 2 years before the world found it. We are exactly halfway through this countdown, and every story tonight is one most people have never fully heard behind the music they grew up loving. If you are new to R&B Pulse Track, welcome. Hit subscribe and turn on the bell right now, because the back half of this list contains the stories you are not going to want to miss. Let's keep going. Number 6. The next recording was not written for Marvin Gaye. His label didn't want him to record it. When he did, they sat on it for 2 years. It became the best-selling Motown single ever released. I Heard It Through the Grapevine. Marvin Gaye, Nard, 1968. Motown/Tamla. Norman Whitfield and Barrett Strong wrote Grapevine in 1966 and offered it to nearly everyone at Motown before it reached Marvin. Smokey Robinson passed. The Isley Brothers recorded a version. Gladys Knight had a top 5 hit with it in 1967.
I'll show hands to make me blue.
Gordy still didn't want Marvin to touch it. He thought the song was used up. Marvin recorded it anyway, slowly, sparsely. He stripped out the urgency and replaced it with dread. Gordy heard it and shelved it for nearly 2 years. When it finally came out in October 1968, it spent 7 weeks at number 1, the longest run at the top for any Motown single at that point. 4 million copies in its first year, the best-selling Motown single ever recorded. Berry Gordy had sat on the greatest record his label would ever produce because he thought he knew better. What follows is a performance born from the purest defiance. A woman who had no reason to still be standing and who stood up anyway. Number 5. Another timeless classic belongs here. Born from genuine physical pain, buried by the people paid to promote it, and rescued by a DJ who simply could not let it go. I Will Survive. Gloria Gaynor. 1978. Polydor Records. Gloria Gaynor recorded I Will Survive on a surgically repaired spine. 6 months out of hospital, not fully healed, in real pain. Everyone in the studio knew it was the superior track. The president of Polydor buried it on the B-side anyway, behind a Righteous Brothers cover called Substitute that peaked at number 107. Then Richie Kazor at Studio 54 flipped the record and started playing the other side on repeat. Club after club picked it up. Radio followed. Polydor relented. It went to number 1 in March 1979 and spent 3 weeks at the top. At the 1980 Grammys, it won Best Disco Recording, a category created specifically for this song and never awarded again. It has since sold more than 15 million copies worldwide and sits in both the Grammy Hall of Fame and the National Recording Registry. The next artist didn't survive a battle. He captured a celebration built around a date that meant absolutely nothing. Number 4. The next recording is the story of pure joy, arriving exactly when the world needed it, and a famous opening line that was chosen simply because it felt right in the mouth. September, Earth, Wind, and Fire. 1978. Columbia Records. By 1978, Earth, Wind, and Fire were one of the best-selling groups on Earth. Maurice White had the groove for September. He had the horn burst that announced something joyful was coming. But the melody kept slipping away. He brought in Al McKay and songwriter Allie Willis to finish it. When the engineers heard the first playback, they started dancing in the control room. The opening line, "Do you remember the 21st night of September?" was not chosen because September 21st meant anything. Willis and White tried every date, every month. That one simply felt right inside the rhythm. When people ask what happened that night, the answer is nothing and everything. The song reached number 1 on the R&B chart and has played at every joyful gathering on earth for over 40 years. It refuses to age. The next voice rewrote the rules of what a soul musician was allowed to be by walking away from everything holding him back and starting completely over. Number 3. The next recording didn't just launch a new chapter. It forced an entire industry to reckon with a genius it had been trying to control since he was 11 years old. Superstition, Stevie Wonder. White House, 1972. Motown/Tamla. Stevie Wonder turned 21 in 1971 and walked straight out of his Motown contract. His deal, signed when he was a minor, had locked his earnings in a trust fund and handed the label control over his creative direction. The moment he turned 21, it was done. He spent a year in isolation, studying synthesizers, mastering engineering, and learning to produce entirely on his own terms. Then he walked back in and built Superstition from the ground up. The clavinet riff at the center of that record, jagged, percussive, almost dangerous, came out of a pure experimentation session. Jeff Beck was in the studio and loved it so much, Wonder offered it to him as a gift. Motown moved faster and released Wonder's version first. It hit #1 on both the pop and R&B charts in January 1973. Raw and hard and funky, in a way his earlier records had never been allowed to be. It opened the door to Intervision's Talking Book and songs in the key of life, making Stevie Wonder the defining musical genius of the 1970s. The next song didn't open a new chapter. It became the most intimate record Motown ever allowed through its doors. #2, the next recording came from a man at the peak of his power. A songwriter in recovery, a teenage girl in the studio, and a song that was never supposed to sound like this. Let's Get It On, Marvin Gaye. 1973. After What's Going On gave Marvin Gaye creative freedom, Motown expected another socially conscious record. Instead, he met songwriter Ed Townsend, freshly out of rehabilitation, who arrived with a lyric about love as healing, almost spiritual in its intention. But as Townsend later wrote in the liner notes, Marvin could sing the Lord's Prayer and it would have sexual overtones. What Townsend meant as devotional, Gaye transformed into the most sensual record Motown had ever produced. Few people know that Janice Hunter, the 17-year-old daughter of jazz guitarist Slim Gaillard, was reportedly in the studio the day they cut the title track. Marvin was still married to Berry Gordy's sister. None of that stopped the feeling from going straight into the microphone. The song spent 61 weeks on the charts, became Motown's largest selling single at the time, and helped invent the slow jam as a genre. Everything you have heard tonight has been extraordinary, but #1 is the recording the world decided, without a vote or a ceremony, would simply never be allowed to end. #1. And now, the one that never left, My Girl, The Temptations. 1964, Motown/Gordy Records. Smokey Robinson wrote My Girl specifically for David Ruffin's voice, not for the group, for that one man and that one instrument. He asked himself a simple question. What does a man say when he has nothing on paper and yet feels like he has everything in the world? The answer became the most elegant declaration of love in the history of popular music. James Jamerson's bass line is so recognizable that the first 4 notes alone stop people mid-step. Paul Reiser's string arrangement sounds like sunlight through a curtain on a Sunday morning. When Ruffin stepped to the microphone, everyone in that room knew they were inside something that would last. My Girl reached #1 in January 1965 and has never left radio. Grammy Hall of Fame, dozens of films, every country on earth where people have loved one another and needed a song to say it. Over 60 years later, it remains the first song the world hears when someone says the word Motown. Smokey Robinson wrote it for one voice. The world claimed it as its own.